What if I told you that on a single January morning in the year 2000, two men shook hands and instantly destroyed more wealth than the GDP of Portugal? No war, no natural disaster, no fraud, just a deal. The biggest corporate merger in American history. And within 2 years, it had evaporated $182 billion in shareholder value. Gone, like it never existed. Here's the part nobody talks about. Everyone knew it was going to fail. Wall Street analysts said it, journalists said it, even executives inside the companies whispered it in hallways. So why did it happen anyway? That answer will tell you something deeply uncomfortable about how power, ego, and the fear of being left behind can make otherwise intelligent people do catastrophically stupid things. This is the story of AOL and Time Warner and the single worst merger in business history. To understand the disaster, you have to understand the fever dream that was the late 1990s internet. The dot-com bubble had convinced an entire generation of investors that the old rules of business were dead. Profit didn't matter. Revenue didn't matter. All that mattered was eyeballs. How many people were looking at your screen? And nobody had more eyeballs than AOL. At its peak, America Online had 30 million subscribers. It was the internet for most Americans. Those little CDs they mailed to your house? AOL spent over $300 million sending them out, and it worked. By 1999, AOL's stock had risen over 800% in 5 years. The company was worth $163 billion. Then there was Time Warner, a different kind of giant. Old media, real assets, CNN, HBO, Warner Brothers, Time Magazine, hundreds of millions in actual revenue built over decades. Two very different companies, two very different worlds. The man who decided to smash them together was Steve Case, AOL's CEO. Visionary, ambitious, and acutely aware of one terrifying truth. The dial-up era was ending. Broadband was coming. And when it arrived, AOL's entire business model would be obsolete overnight. Case needed a lifeboat. He found one in Time Warner's Gerald Levin, a man so seduced by the idea of leading the future that he didn't stop to ask whether the deal made any sense at all. January 10th, 2000, New York City. Case and Levin step onto a stage together and announce the unthinkable. AOL would acquire Time Warner in an all-stock deal worth $182 billion, the largest corporate merger in history. The crowd went wild. The press called it a marriage of old and new media. The vision was intoxicating. AOL's 30 million subscribers plugged directly into Time Warner's movies, music, news, and cable lines. A vertically integrated media empire for the 21st century. Here's what they didn't mention on that stage. AOL was paying with stock, not cash. And that stock was only worth what it was worth because the bubble hadn't burst yet. Case knew the clock was ticking. He needed to convert that inflated internet paper into real assets before the music stopped. In other words, AOL was essentially paying with monopoly money, and Time Warner accepted it. Gerald Levin later admitted he didn't consult his board, didn't run deep due diligence, and signed away one of the most valuable media companies on earth in what amounted to a gentleman's handshake fueled by the fear of missing the future. The deal officially closed in January 2001. The dot-com bubble had already begun to collapse. Within months of the merger closing, the catastrophe was visible. The cultures were incompatible in every way imaginable. Time Warner executives, battle-hardened legacy media veterans, despised AOL's brash startup energy. AOL employees thought Time Warner was a dinosaur. Meetings turned into turf wars. Departments refused to share data. Cross-promotion deals collapsed before they even launched. Meanwhile, AOL's core business was disintegrating in real time. Broadband was spreading. Google had launched. People no longer needed AOL to access the internet. They just opened a browser. Subscriber numbers started falling, ad revenue dried up, and the stock cratered. By the end of 2002, the combined company reported a $99 billion loss, the largest single-year corporate loss in American history at that time. $99 billion in 1 year. To make it worse, investigations revealed that AOL had been inflating its advertising revenue in the months before the merger closed, booking deals in misleading ways to keep the stock price high long enough to complete the transaction. The SEC launched a formal investigation. Levin resigned in 2002. Case resigned from the board in 2003. The executives who had championed this deal as the dawn of a new era quietly disappeared and left shareholders holding the wreckage. In 2009, Time Warner officially spun off AOL as a separate company. The deal that was supposed to create a $350 billion empire had produced nothing, less than nothing. Leadership tried everything. New CEOs cycled in and out, 5 in 8 years. They restructured divisions, rebranded products, and launched new initiatives. None of it mattered, because the fundamental problem was never strategic. It was architectural. The two companies were built on entirely different philosophies of what business was. You cannot merge a subscription-based internet gateway with a content conglomerate and expect the cultures to self-organize. Integration requires shared vision at every level, not just a handshake at the top. There's also the harder lesson no one wants to say out loud. No synergy was ever real. The projected benefits, cross-selling, distribution, content pipelines, were modeled on assumptions that never materialized. The numbers were, in large part, a story that executives told themselves to justify a decision they had already emotionally committed to. By the time AOL was spun off, it was worth approximately $3.4 billion, down from $163 billion in less than a decade. If you think this is ancient history, look closer. In 2018, AT&T acquired Time Warner, yes, the same Time Warner, for $85 billion. By 2021, they were spinning off their media assets again. Same playbook, same result. In 2022, the Warner Bros. Discovery merger wrote down $43 billion in asset value within its first 2 years. And tech companies continue making this exact mistake. The pattern is identical every time. A company with an inflated valuation acquires a legacy company in a panic, overpays, underestimates culture clash, and destroys billions in the process. A Harvard Business Review study found that 70 to 90% of all mergers failed to deliver their projected value. 70 to 90%. The AOL Time Warner deal wasn't an anomaly. It was just the most expensive version of a very common mistake. So what do we actually learn from $182 billion vaporizing into thin air? First, inflated currency creates catastrophic decisions. When your stock price is built on speculation rather than fundamentals, every acquisition made with that stock is a ticking time bomb. AOL didn't buy Time Warner. AOL's bubble bought Time Warner, and when the bubble popped, there was nothing underneath. Second, culture is not a soft issue. It is the whole game. You can have perfect strategic logic and still destroy everything if the people involved don't share a common operating reality. Integration isn't announced, it's built, slowly, from the ground up. No press conference can do that for you. Third, fear is a terrible reason to make a $182 billion decision. Both CEOs acted primarily out of fear. Fear of broadband, fear of irrelevance, fear of missing the future. That fear bypassed every rational safeguard that should have stopped this deal. The most dangerous emotion in the boardroom isn't greed, it's panic, dressed up as vision. Here's the thought I'll leave you with. Right now, somewhere, a CEO is sitting in a room, looking at a competitor, and thinking, if we don't move now, we'll be left behind. They're about to make a very large, very fast decision, and the people around them, the ones who could stop it, are staying quiet, because nobody wants to be the person who said no to the future. The question is, are they reading the future correctly, or are they just afraid of it? If this story changed how you think about business and big money, subscribe, because next week we're looking at another deal that seemed like genius at the time and cost billions more than anyone ever admitted. See you then.